Come on. There we go. All right. I think that everything's working. We'll see how it goes. Already, as I've been getting set up, the camera has choked once, so I didn't have to plug it in, plug it back at it. But it just was like, oh hey, there's nothing, and then it came back on. So I hope everyone's doing well. I forgot to pop out the chat so I can see it more clearly. Doing that currently. And there we go. Let's see here. We've got some greetings from the Pocket Dimensions. That's nice. We've got sunny southern Finland. Greetings from Plymouth. Devon, England. Calgary, Belgium. Hopefully the camera has been fixed. Not really, no. Glasgow. North Essex. Germany. Tennessee. Denmark. Manchester. Limerick, England. Ireland. Sunny Pittsburgh for a change. Let's see here. Japan. We've got Stockholm. We've got Cali. Poland, Toledo, Ohio, Thailand, Scotland. We've got a prospective orc player from Scotland. That's pretty good. Sweden, Moscow, Austria, Peru, Ireland, great state of Texas. We've got Austin, Texas. We've got Newfoundland, Texas. No, that's not true. It's actually Newfoundland, Canada. We've got Warsaw, Burlington, Ontario, Windsor, Ontario. Good morning from Southern Maryland. I was just in Ontario a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, for the mini wargaming big grand opening hootenanny. It was a very good time, and it was lovely there. Crazy Lou says that if Warhammer did Star Wars instead of Lord of the Rings, it'd be so much better. That is an interesting thought experiment. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. That would be interesting. I mean, Lord of the Rings is more up their alley. You know what I mean? To some degree. That is interesting. That is very interesting. South Carolina. North Carolina, which is right below it. Bulgaria, Poland, Orlando, Florida. Matt at work at Milkcan / Game 4 was just in Orlando for Dice Tower Con. Right around the 4th of July, he was there. So yeah. Ireland, Pennsylvania. We've got... What else have we got here? Tatooine. That makes sense. Netherlands, Kenosha, Wisconsin. How you doing, Nick? Cork, Ireland. Got a hot and muggy St. Louis. It's currently not super hot here. It's going to get warmish. Not terrible bad. But it's currently in the low 70s. But I think it's kind of humid outside. Although, I don't know. Maybe it's... I thought... Looking at the weather, it was supposed to be a pretty good day for Rattlecan, I thought. So yeah. Let's see here. We've got VJ Morph in the chat asking a question. Those Stormtroopers, is that rough surface the minis or the paint? It's the paint. That particular batch, the primer was not so great. The thing is that, and you guys have seen this before if you've ever taken pictures of your miniatures, taking photographs of your miniatures always exacerbates any kind of flaws in your... So if you looked at those in, like on a tabletop, they look fine. But when I get real close with the camera and take a picture, they do look kind of chunky. The next 2 squads that I've done and the 3rd squad that I do, which I will totally have 4 squads of Stormtroopers by the time I'm done, the next 2 squads and the last one, which is not done yet, will be all primed airbrush. So they're smoother looking. But the Rattlecam primer I used on those came out a little chunky, but like I said, it doesn't look that bad in person. It's just when you take pictures of your models, they have a tendency to look kind of junk. So let's see here. I just started collecting and painting miniatures a week ago. This channel was a big incentive to finally take the plunge. Loving it, says Modest Almighty. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad that it helps. It helps get you into the hobby. Poppy Appletree says, I don't think that Star Wars and GW would mix very well. Star Wars is a much more hopeful IP, and it's a licensed product, so expensive, and GW is already too expensive. Well, I mean, the Lord of the Rings is a licensed product, so it's not that they don't have the background in using that kind of thing. But I don't. Yeah, again, I don't know how that would have ever worked out, or if it would have worked out, or anything along those lines. You're right though. It is a bit more of a hopeful product, whereas I mean, Lord of the Rings is kind of hopeful, at least for the most part. Whereas the normal GW fare of Warhammer and now Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000, not particularly hopeful. That is very true. I agree. Grimlock Steve asks, do you think Warcry will suffer from GW bloat like Kill Team is now? I guess I wouldn't say that Kill Team is bloated. They've added on things that you can choose to use or choose not to use. I think that the bloat is when they add rules that you have to use. But if you don't, like right now, I still predominantly play standard, regular Kill Team. The guys that I play with, we have started using the sub-factions, so that's kind of a cool thing. But yeah. Travis Becker asks, how's the Inquisitorial Kill Team coming? July White Dwarf will introduce Eisenhorn, and also Chaos Demons, too. I'm kind of putting it on hold right now until I see what that looks like, because when this July White Dwarf comes out, it may basically fulfill the original idea I had, where I start working on it and they come out with it, and then theirs is better than mine. I have a suspicion that's what's going to happen, but we'll take a look once the July White Dwarf comes out, which should be coming out, I think, next week or the week after, I think. So, but yeah, for those of you that don't know, quite some time ago I started working on an idea for basically Inquisitorial Kill Team. So you could have an Inquisitorial army in Kill Team. And I, at the time, said, most likely what will happen is that GW will actually drop it before I do. They'll come out with it before I do. And then a couple of months went by, and then they were like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to have rules for Eisenhorn, who is a well-known Inquisitor in a series of books and stuff like that, and whatnot. And we're going to be putting him into the July White Dwarf and whatnot and all that stuff. And also Chaos Demons and all that stuff. So they're adding more stuff that way. But it'll be interesting to see. Chris says, thank you for the Krylon camouflage recommendation. Works great with contrast. Yeah, it does work pretty well so far with contrast. Definitely. Emma says, afternoon from Denmark. Been spending a lot of time trying to figure out which Warcry warband to buy first. I want them all. Honestly, the last several that they've released, I appreciate that they're very interesting and crazy and very different. I don't want them necessarily, like the most recent ones, like especially like the ones with the big giant weird face masks, that they just released like a couple days ago and showed off, and the one that's kind of technically death but chaos as well. Like those, to me, I just look at them and go, how am I ever going to take them anywhere? They're like, I'm going to have to magnetize the bases and put them in like a Magna rack or a metal tackle box or something like that, because they're super crazy spindly and they're covered in spikes going all kinds of different directions, and I'm like, I can't put them in foam, they'll just break anytime I try to get them out. Some of the earlier stuff that they've shown off for it, I'm more interested in. Even the bird guys, I like the bird guys kind of pretty well, but it's gonna be very interesting to see. And I think the terrain's gonna look great too, so that'll be fun as well. You know what I should do is there we go. Okay, I goofed up and did a bad thing, and so now I can see what's going on. Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to get you, and then that, and that's clicked out. Okay, cool. Mr. Bacon says, I'm planning on getting into Frostgrave soon. Frostgrave is a very good game. I enjoy it quite a bit, and I love the fact that you can use kind of whatever models you want. It's weird because I enjoy really good models. Like I enjoy Games Workshop's models. I enjoy, a lot of different good model companies that do good work. I enjoy the Wreckage models from those metal models for Wreckage are great for any kind of they're great for Wreckage, which is a post-apocalyptic. I'm not completely awake yet. Post-apocalyptic game, but they're great for all kinds of different types of games like that. And there's a lot of great model companies out there. That being said, I also do enjoy games where they don't have a model line attached to them at all, like Frostgrave, like Rangers of Shadow Deep, which is kind of the same thing almost, at least same person. There's Zone Raiders I've been getting into lately, and I love the idea of being able to make the models that I want to use. Somewhere, here. So this is the Sanctus from what's his name, Gene Stealer Cults, and I'm going to use that model and modify it for Zone Raiders. And so he's got in the artwork he's got the knife, but also you can build him with a sniper rifle where he's kind of holding it and he's crouching down. And I'm going to get rid of that head and put a different head on, and maybe even use a different gun, but I'm still going to use the gun one instead, and do some other stuff and everything like that. And I really enjoy that kind of being able to go through and build your own stuff. And Frostgrave is great for that because they make their own models for certain stuff. They do have their own plastic line of like soldiers and cultists and barbarians and things like that, which you can use, but you also heavily modify them. My 2 war bands for Frostgrave are predominantly all just like weird mixtures of Reaper bones and modified GW stuff and just a bunch of other just strange and random like metal Reaper models and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's a lot of fun. So let's see here. Daniel asks, hi Adam, what would you say are the similarities to Warhammer? How much time does it take a game? Is it more expensive or cheaper than Warhammer? I'm not sure what you're asking about. If you're talking about Frostgrave, it's a good deal cheaper because you just buy the book, and then there's just the one book, and then you do the models you want. The games can take about as long, sometimes a little less time, because it's more skirmish based. If you are talking about Star Wars Legion, then the games can take a little bit less time, I feel, at least the ones that I've played. The models are definitely cheaper. Everything about Star Wars for the most part is generally kind of a bit cheaper. Like you get a box of Stormtroopers, let's say, because I've been working on Stormtroopers. A box of Stormtroopers, you get 7 Stormtroopers which is an entire squad. You can't ever have more than that in a squad. Actually, you can't ever have more than 6 in the squad, but they give you 2 heavy weapons guys, so you can use this one or that one. But so you buy a squad of 7 and it costs $25, where GW generally has a tendency to cost a bit more than that in those kind of situations. So that's kind of where that's at. Like I like the ATST, the big kind of chicken walker, thing from the movies. That thing's like $50. That's like the most expensive model. The core box I think is $80 or $90. So definitely. So if that's what you were asking, that's hopefully the answer, but I may be wrong. Let's see here. What else have we got? Friday video was great. I've been sticking together a bunch of Napoleonic British, and getting a bit burned out on that product. We'll go back and paint orcs a bit for, I think. I could definitely see switching back and forth between Napoleonics and orcs as being a great kind of palate cleanser. That totally makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Let me see here. What else? Grimlock Steve says, the amount of time Warcry has been advertised that Slow Drip has killed any hype or excitement for it. I'll definitely be picking it up. Picking up Untamed Beasts for my Slaves of Darkness. I don't know. Like, they've changed things so much since back in the day. Like, back in the day, they didn't talk about anything until a week or two before it came out. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, guess what? New Tau Codex is coming out. But the rumor sites had known about the Tau Codex, for example, coming out for like 3 months. So they're like, hey, guess what? Tau Codex. And everyone's like, yeah, we know that. Because, what is it? Fate 212 those like that kind of website, and like Bella Lost Souls, and like Beasts of War, and all these sites have been like, yeah, we know, we've got leaks or whatever. So I prefer the new way where they basically say, look, this is what's coming out, here's what's coming, that kind of stuff. I don't personally find the long lead up where they talk about it for months and months and months. That doesn't bother me. I suppose if it's a hype thing, then maybe, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, but I don't find that I'm like, well, now I'm not interested anymore because they've been talking about it too long. That doesn't bother me. I don't know why, but yeah. VJ Morph asks, is Nick out on patrol today? Yeah, back here. No, Nick is Nick. My wife went on she's got a gig. She had a gig last night and a gig today. So she and Nick Ramondo are gone out on music patrol. I guess you could say that. We'll call it that. But yeah, so that's why Nick's not back there today. And the camera just dropped for a second and came back. So you got that to look forward to. Let's see. How does Star Wars models compare to GW Warhammer in terms of detail and quality? They're not as good. Like straight up, they're just not quite as good. They've got okay detail. So the material itself is different. I'm very possibly wrong on this, but I believe that GW stuff is generally ABS plastic. It's a harder plastic. Whereas I've been told that the different stuff from Star Wars is currently PVC. So it's a little bit bendy. It's not nearly as rubbery as like HeroClix or anything like that. It's not as rubbery even as like the WizKids unpainted like D&D guys and stuff like that. But it does still have a little bit of flex to it, which is kind of nice in that like all these folks over here, all these here Stormtroopers, they're all two parts. So like their head and their body and their legs, that's all one piece. And then the arms are attached to the gun. And then you just kind of spread the shoulders apart, put some glue in the sockets, and just kind of and stick them on there, and they just go in a certain way, and it's really easy to build them. Like I can build a squad of Stormtroopers in about half an hour, like 7 guys, boom. Not a ton of mold lines. The downside is that there are sometimes mold lines that are hard to catch because they're so small. But then once you start putting paint and stuff like that, also you're like, oh well, there's the mold line. But it's not a huge deal. Again. The poses are growing on me. When Star Wars Legion first came out, I was looking at it and going, this looks like crap. But I'm used to much more highly dynamic models. I'm looking at a lot of GW stuff now, which you can't pose it any other way than the way it goes. Like this dude that I just showed you here, he is very dynamically posed, if you can barely see him there. He is like bent down and he's got a hand on a rock and he's got a gun or a knife or whatever, and he's like very like he looks like a cartoon or like a comic book pose, like on the cover of a comic book. Whereas these Stormtroopers are kind of standing around. I mean, like they're kind of walking and moving and they've got their guns and stuff like, but it's not as dynamically kind of crazy. But really, when you think about it, that is indicative of the way they look in the movie. You don't see them like flipping off of like rocks and doing a handstand and whatever. I think it's just in my mind I was comparing it to GW stuff and to Malifaux. Like Malifaux, those models from Weird Games are amazingly posed to the point where they become difficult to build, difficult to store in like foam and stuff like that. So, yeah, but honestly, especially for like the inexpensiveness of the models, they're actually decent that way. I think that the Rebels look better than some of the current Imperials, although things are getting better. Like, they just released a Bosk, who is a lizard bounty hunter from Empire Strikes Back, I think was his first release. He was in the crowd with, Boba Fett and IG-88 and those folks on the Star Destroyer or whatever, and Darth Vader was like, no disintegrations and all that jazz. Anyway, so big lizard in my backyard, Bosk. He's, they've been getting better on those sculpts as well. And coming out in either late August or early September, they're releasing 2 new factions, which are basically from the prequels. You're going to have the clone troopers and the droids. I just found out recently, which is interesting to me. I just found out recently that the new models are actually going to be on sprue. Like when you get these current models, these PVC models, they come in little plastic baggies and they're already not on sprues. They're just in the baggie. You take them out, you glue them together, stick them on a base, boom. Evidently, the new stuff and all of the stuff going forward is going to be on sprues in a harder plastic like the GW stuff, which is cool because it'll make the models look better. I don't know if it's going to cost more. Secondly, the other issue that I've got a little bit is that I think a little bit of a benefit. One of the reasons I'm interested in this game as well is because I know that for newer wargamers, this game has got some benefit because the models are so easy to build and because they're generally easy to paint. Like Stormtroopers are pretty easy to paint, and there's a lot of models in the game that are just pretty easy to paint because they're actually a little bit more military, so they're kind of everything's one color. And moving forward, like getting like 2 parts in a baggie and then just going, oh, that's how they go together. That's easy for a lot of newer people. Is simpler than now I have a sprue and I have to figure out which set of arms goes with which body, and then I've got to clip them off, and I've got to go through all that stuff. I think that can be a little bit more difficult. So I'm a little bummed, just slightly, that they're doing that. But I think it will probably make better looking models. It'll just take a little bit longer to put them together. Even for me, who's been doing this for a long time, I was amazed at how quickly I could put together a squad of 7 Stormtroopers like that. And I think that's going to be maybe a little bit of a bummer, but we'll see. Yes. So, what else we got here? Corvus Games Terrain says the newer Star Wars Legion poses are better. Sabine, which is one of the new, I might be mispronouncing that. Also, one of the new ones that came out at the same time as Bosk did, is much more dynamic looking than Luke. Also, they're starting to include alternate pieces for different weapons. Yeah, like what's his name? Bosk has got 2 different weapon. Like you can use these arms or those arms, so you can swap those things out, which is fun. So yeah, definitely. What else here? Eric Simpson says, Dead Milkman, awesome reference. Thank you, I appreciate it. John Ashley Smith says, the worst material in my opinion is the plastic that Mantic uses. When you're used to metal, styrene, and resin, ABS is a whole new animal. Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of the stuff that Mantic used to use, they used to refer to as restic, which was like, from what I was told, a mixture, itchy nose, sorry, mixture of resin and plastic, which is why they get the word restic, resin, plastic, restic. I built a bunch of Dead Zone dudes with it, and they were also in the same kind of, like, they came in a bag, and they weren't on a sprue. The very first wave of Dead Zone dudes were kind of soft in the detail department, I'm not going to lie. But now, from what I understand, they've also moved to harder plastic stuff on sprues. So for the newest stuff that they've been putting out, it's kind of the same thing. Definitely. Let me see here. Tabletop Oddity says, for the Clone Wars box, I believe only the droids is on the sprues. The clones in the core box we think are still the old style. Interesting. I was listening to a podcast, The Fifth Trooper? I think it was The Fifth Trooper. And they were talking about it recently. Or else it was another spot. There's like 2 podcasts that I found for Star Wars Legion recently. One of them was Fifth Trooper, and the other one I can't think of the name of. Did I put it in my... I use Overcast for listening to podcasts, in case anyone cares. Nope, no idea. All right, well... There's the Fifth Trooper, and then there's another one, which evidently I don't remember what it is now. But I was listening to, must have been the Fifth Trooper, since that's on my actual podcast player. And they were talking about that. And that's what I had first heard. I had not heard until that podcast that they were going to be switching over to more sprues and stuff like that. Which, I mean, especially with the droids, I can see putting those in a harder plastic and putting them on sprues because they are so spindly. You would want there to be a harder plastic. But with the thicker, like... Clone Troopers, that can make sense. I could see why they would stick with the PVC type of material or whatever. That makes sense. So yeah, let's see here. What else have we got? It's all fun and games, says Final Fantasy. Fantasy Flight Games not totally happy with Legion sales, it seems like, so they're willing to shift it up. Yeah, I mean, it's like there's not a lot of people that are playing it in my area. There's some, but not, in comparison. But it's also the game's a year old barely. So, if I'm glad that Fantasy Flight is not just like, oh, it's not, taken over the world yet. Let's get rid of it. First of all, they couldn't, I don't think, because that license for, Disney was probably crazy expensive. And I'm sure there's probably like a certain amount of contract where they have to produce some amount of stuff. Like if they just dropped it in the first year, that would look bad on Disney and Star Wars in general, maybe. So I'm sure that there's like rules and things like that. And it's not, like I said, it's not, taking over the world. But it is growing. And I think that the new set with Clone Wars and droids will probably also do well because, and for those of us who are older, we may scoff at this, but for the younger folks, a lot of them, to them, Star Wars is the prequels because that was the movies that they watched a ton as a kid. Maybe they saw them in the theater, or maybe they were young enough that they just watched them over and over and over again on DVD or whatever, like every day, like when they'd be home from school, they'd watch, Attack of the Clones again or whatever. And so to them, like when they see Stormtroopers and Rebels, they're like, meh, because they just don't maybe really pay that much attention. They've probably seen, 4, 5, and 6, but 1, 2, and 3, that's their jam because that's what they did when they were a kid. I went and saw Episode 4, New Hope, in the theater when it originally ran. I was like 7 or something like that. And actually, I think I've told this story before. My mom and I were going to see Benji, a Benji movie. Benji was this dog. They were these live-action movies. Benji was like Lassie, but not as tall. And we were going to go see that movie, and we bumped into some people my mom knew in the parking lot, and they were just coming out of Star Wars, and they were like, you should go see Star Wars. It was really good, and I think that, that the little one there would like it. And so she looked down at me, and she's like, hey, you want to go see Star Wars? And I was like, okay. And so, here I am today. I don't know what would have happened if I would have said, nah, let's go see Benji instead. Maybe I'd be a veterinarian or something. I don't know. But, so nonetheless, it was, I think that because of this new clones and droids set, that may bring some folks in that were not really interested before, so that'll hopefully also help grow it as well. And just having more factions, I think, is useful. Now, there's a part of me, I'm not going to lie, there's a part of me that is not, like, if I see a battle between, droids and the Empire, I'm going to be like, that didn't happen. Like, none of this actually happened, obviously. But there's just going to be a part of me that's, like, if you decide, like, if two, Empire players play against each other, you'd be like, oh, it's military maneuvers. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. But when it's, like, rebels versus, again, droids or something like that, or rebels versus clone troopers and stuff, you'd be like, this doesn't make any sense. But whatever, it'll be fine. Like, the other option in that situation is then to go to the Flames of War route, where you have early war, mid-war, and late war, and you pick, well, what are we playing? We're playing late war. Okay, cool. That means we can use this and this and this and this, but we can't use this and this and this. Or we're playing early war. Okay, well, this stuff hasn't been invented yet. So you either have to separate it that way, which really kind of fractures your user base to some degree, or you have to kind of just let her ride and make that stuff. So, yeah. Marcus says that Legions is probably doing a lot better than Rune Wars ever did, so I wouldn't be worried about it. Yes, that is also true. The camera's about to flash. Or you guys are probably actually hearing me say that after it happens, but I don't see it happen on my screen over here until, nonetheless. Yeah, Legions is doing a lot better than Rune Wars did, because Rune Wars didn't do very well at all. And plus, it didn't have a big, expensive license, really. I mean, it had a license, I guess, but it didn't have an expensive one probably to go up against. So, Roland says, so do you use an app to judge the humidity for rattle cans? What humidity level do you look for when priming models? Actually, yeah, I do. I have the weather app that I like the best is called Weather Underground. And the thing that's cool about it is that you have customizable parameters, so you can set a thing that says, if you're like, let's say that you're into swimming and you want to know when the best time to swim is, you can go in and say, this wind from here to here, this temperature from here to here, and you can set a bunch of different parameters. Well, for rattle can, I just picked up a rattle can and it was like, okay, well, don't use it don't use it over 70% humidity or whatever. And don't use it if the temperature is outside of, 60 to 90. And I think also set wind in there too, because if it's too windy, it's hard sometimes to rattle can outside because it blows away all the paint. So I just put those parameters in there, and then I can just pull up my phone at any time and look and go, oh yeah, no, Sunday's gonna be a really good day, because it makes like a little bar graph and shows you when it's like really good versus when it's like, it's pretty good, and it's actually kind of useful. So Weather Underground is the app that I use on my phone, and I think it's just a good weather app anyway. It's got a decent radar and all that kind of stuff. When you get old, even though I'm not a dad, you still just are constantly like, what's the weather like? Is it going to rain? When you're younger, you don't care, evidently. I don't remember caring much. But nowadays, I'm very concerned about the weather most of the time. I don't know. I'm always just concerned that it's going to rain a lot and my house is going to flood, which the basement has become moist from time to time. So I've always got that concern. Anyway, that's their app that I like to use. Weather Underground or Wonderground with a W and an underground. That's also another thing to use. Yeah, it works quite nicely. Andreas says Clone Troopers have one other advantage: they don't have to be white and still be correct. That is technically true, because Clone Troopers were into like kind of customizing their stuff. That being said, I am not going 100% canon with all my stuff. So my Stormtroopers are going to be white. But you'll notice from the bases, I'm making everything desert. Like all my bases, all my terrain, everything's going to be desert. Now, these guys are technically not done in this picture because A, they haven't been varnished, and B, the left shoulder pad is that guy's got the right shoulder pad because he's the boss or the sergeant or whatever. But the left shoulder pad on these guys, I'm going to be painting a color so that I've got like red squad, blue squad, green squad, that kind of stuff. So I can tell them apart and be able to put them back together again, on the tabletop then that way. So I see people who will paint the rims of the bases a different color. I always like my rims of my bases to be black. I'm just that way. But so I'm going to do their shoulder pads in slightly different color on just one side, which I know is not canon, whatever, that's fine. I'm also going to have a squad of snow troopers in there. Well, now you say, well, what the hell did snow troopers doing in the desert? Well, technically snow troopers are really hazardous environment troopers. So I'm going to be painting them tan. And my scout troopers, which are like the guys that get on the speeder bikes in episode 6 in the, on Endor and all that crap, those guys are also going to be desert painted. Like, so I have no problem. Like, I'm going to keep the regular, bog standard Stormtroopers white because they are like the, ground troop puds of the Empire, and they're like, we're not going to bother customizing your armor, thanks. But like the fancier folks, like the hazardous environment troopers, the scout troopers, that kind of stuff, they will have armor that is matched roughly to the environs in which they are supposed to be fighting. So I'm just going to do it that way because that's the way I prefer it. But yeah, clone troopers in the normal canon got pretty squirrely with their armor and did all kinds of crazy stuff in the movies, like just to kind of differentiate themselves because they're clones, See, I think if you're all clones, you do want to have like this sort of individuality. That's not a word, but I'm making it one. But since Stormtroopers aren't clones, they already know that they're individuals, so they're like, whatever, man, I'll just wear... Like, the whole concept, honestly, of wearing those outfits doesn't make a ton of sense. Because, like, you could be slacking off, and then somebody would be like, your boss would be like, hey, cut that out, and you'd be like... And you just move around, and then it'd be like a shell game, and then you'd never know who it was that was slacking off, and, unless the sergeants or whatever all have, like, an AR thing in their helmets so that they can see, like... TK421 and like this one's name is Bob and whatever and all that kind of stuff, so you can see Bob, get back in a line. But there's like no markings on them otherwise, which kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that most of the people that worked on the original Star Wars movie, The New Hope, Episode 4, most of them probably were never in the military. So when they made these guys look like that, they were like, it's just not practical. There's just so much that's not practical about Star Wars, but that's fine because we, most of us enjoy it anyway. All right, so... what else have we got here? Let me see here. What do we got here? Colin says, I finally got to one of your streams live. I'm finishing up my Helverins. So thank you. I'm glad for you to be here, Colin. Let's see here. Mish says, I'd pick a clone legion. I'm a fan if I were doing clones, like 501st. That'd be pretty cool. Kevin says, hey, Adam, would you finish painting an army in the quality level you are able to pull off now, or would you keep them primed and learn on other models first? So if you're just getting into painting, I guess it depends on the size of the army. If it's a really big army and you're just getting into painting, I would definitely probably practice on some other stuff first, whether it's like some cheap like Reaper Bones or some stuff you buy off of eBay just for practice, you know. If you're just getting into it, I would just go to town and do some practice, get some stuff under your belt, and then be able to go from there, and then start working on your army if you've already got them all planned out or whatever and that kind of stuff. Now, understand that if it takes a really long time, the army rules may change and your list build could be, you know, kaput. It might be, you know, if it takes you like 2 years to really get where you want to go, by that point a new version of the game might be out, or it might be a new version of the Codex or the Battle Tome or whatever. You know, it's hard to say. If you've been painting for a while, though, then I would just tell you to start working on that army, you know, honestly. But if you're pretty new to it, I would tell you probably at least practice on some other models before. If your first big army is the first model you've ever painted before, do some practice. It's always important. It's kind of like, you know, like if you try to learn a new instrument or you start to draw or something else that's creative like that, and you're like, okay, well, my very first time ever picking up a guitar, I'm going to play a song. Not really. No, you're probably not. Or the very first time that I draw something, I'm going to make a comic book. No, probably not. You should. Practice is important. So yeah, maybe do that on some models that you don't care much about, or something that's cheap or whatever. I always tell people, honestly, start like by painting. Like again, you can go paint cheap stuff like Reaper Bones or those Wizards, WizKids, you know, unpainted models. If you've got friends who are into RPGs, hook up with them and say, look, I'll paint you, you know, your little character, and then you can have it for your Dungeons and Dragons, or you work with the DM in that situation. They need a bunch of orcs or kobolds or skeletons or whatever they need for the game, and be like, yeah, I can paint those up for you. And then you paint up relatively simple stuff. You're doing it for free, so they're happy with it, even though maybe the quality is not quite where you are happy with it yet, but you improve and you get some stuff under your belt. The other option is to... for lack of a better term, get into a Kickstarter, because then you'll get some models. I mean, Lord, I got the Hellboy box around here somewhere for the Hellboy Kickstarter, and that's a lot of models. Just board games in general are a good way to start. Like if you're interested in playing Zombicide, just paint all the zombies that are in there. You'll learn a lot, actually. So that's really helpful. Let me see here. Mutant Mike says, I bought a couple of Biker Scouts just because I love them. They are my favorite. I think that's a good reason to buy stuff like that. Yeah, my Imperial list, off the top of my head, is... So I'm not running Darth Vader. Number one, I'm just not real happy with his sculpt. If I do eventually build him, I am going to modify him to some degree. I'm going to get that... He's got the lightsaber kind of pointed down, like he forgot that he was holding it, and I'm going to raise it up a little bit, and I'm going to do something different with his hand. His hand is kind of like this, and I think I'm going to cut it at the wrist and rotate it so it's like this. So he's like, which I think would be fun. But he's also like 200 points base, and you're building an 800-point army. So that one big, tall drink of water is a quarter of your army, and that's without even any upgrades yet. He can't even do cool stuff like saber throw unless you add those cards on, and it'd make him even more expensive. So I'm not running Darth Vader in an 800-point army. Instead of running General Veers, who is 80 points, and he is, I mean, he's not a beat stick like Vader is, but he helps. He's a support character, kind of HQ, as opposed to I'm going to run out and get gunned down before I can get into any combat kind of HQ. So I'm going to be running Veers, and then I've got 4 units of Stormtroopers. I've got 2 units of 2 speeder bike dudes. I've got an AT-ST, and I've got like a sniper team, which are basically scouts. And I think that's about it. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm kind of going that way. Now, people will tell me, "Oh, you don't want the AT-ST. It's too big. It's too many points." I'm not a competitive player, so I kind of don't care. I just really want an ATST. So I want to paint it, and I know it's not great, but it's not bad. So at the very least, I'll paint it, run it for a while, and then decide, okay, I'm going to start doing something different and maybe swap some stuff out. What seems to be going on in the competitive meta that I see is that it's all about activations. So like that game, like every unit is an activation. So you want to go with more units and less expensive units. That's why you don't go with Vader generally, because he's an expensive unit, and now you only have 600 points or less if you actually upgrade him, to for the rest of your army, and that becomes difficult. So having more activations, 9, 10, 11 different activations in your army, meaning different units, is important. Whereas if you have like 6 activations in your army or only 7, that's like evidently not enough. This is, again, me not being a competitive or even strategic person. I'm listening and reading to these things going, okay, I see what you're saying. So I'm trying to I'm very possibly this is all due to the people at the company who are like, if we make it so that you can run fewer things in your army and still win, then people will buy fewer models. So let's design the game so that you kind of want more models than less. But even like my current army list of 800 folks with I think it's got 9 activations is still maybe 32 models. So it's not a lot, it's not a ton. Oh, the camera locked up. All right, I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in again. And we'll see how that works out. All right. What are we doing? Anything? No? There we go. Okay. So, let's see here. Last 3 years, says John Ashley Smith, I have set the goal to paint 100 minis in a year. First year only managed 48, last year 112, and year only 40 so far. Well, you're halfway through. If you can kind of speed up a bit, you'll probably be able to make it this year. I think that's a good idea. Let me see here. Jared says, ever paint busts? Seems like logical next step for a hobbyist, mostly painter. I don't see myself as a mostly painter. I do have a tendency to paint more than I play, but I still do enjoy playing. Also, I'm not a display painter for the most part. I mean, maybe someday I might go down that road, but for the most part, I like to paint stuff for tabletop and get things done. So yeah, I'm in this sort of weird spot, I'm not going to lie, where I'm not a super competitive player who just has to paint stuff so that they can get it on the table, and a person who only paints and doesn't play. Like, I like to do both, but it seems as if I like to half-ass both of them, which is not technically true. Well, it is true in gaming. I am a half-ass gamer because I'm not, like I said, not strategic, not great at that stuff. I just want to have fun. So for me, fun is a great-looking table with better than tabletop, at least slightly better than tabletop models that didn't take me a ton of time to do, which is why I'm always looking for ways to cut corners that still make good results. But yeah, I don't see myself ever doing busts because you can't really put them out on the table. You know what I mean? Like that's I want to have really cool looking models that I can then put on the table and play with my friends and take pictures and do cool stuff like that. But for me, a bust, it's just not my area of interest at this point. I mean, I've seen some really cool ones, but I just don't see myself painting them. It's just, however people want to do it. The camera's locked up again. This is going to be a fun one. I'm getting some good memes going on, though, here with these... there we go. Okay, it just started up again. I just poked at it. I've looked into getting a new doohickey to make the camera go, and I need to do a little bit more research and then pull the trigger. Still trying to figure out what the problem is, because it worked great for, quite some time. I am wondering if it's the heat. I mean, it is warmer in here today than it is, say, in the middle of winter, but still, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like, that device doesn't even feel even warm to me. It's not cold, but it's not like, like a lot of times electric things get kind of hot or warm. So it doesn't feel like that's what's going on there. Anyway. Let me see here. What else have we got? What is this Star Wars game, says Boxer77? Star Wars Legion. It's made by Fantasy Flight Games. Came out about a year ago. And it's pretty cool. Michael Hall asks, where do you start with Star Wars tabletop? I would probably pick up the core box, which comes with Empire dudes and also Rebel dudes. And you got your Darth Vader on one side, you got your Luke Skywalker on the other, you've got, some Stormtroopers, you've got some Rebel troopers, that kind of stuff. Comes with dice, comes with rulers and jazz like that, and the rules and stuff like that. Now, neither of the forces that are in that box will build a full 800-point list, but if you wanted to just start out and work on just the stuff in that box, they are kind of equal for the most part. There are people that'll tell you that they're not or whatever and that kind of stuff, and that's fine, but they're playable. I have played just the starter box demos with a guy at the local shop, and they're fine. So yeah, it's a good. That core box is a good place to start, and then start doing some research about, whether you are just like, I want to have cool looking models that do this, and I just want to have fun, or I want to be more competitive, and you can go either direction that and see how that works out. So yeah, it's the way to go. Let me see here. What else? Jared says, makes sense. I don't play at all and just buy a model squad and paint it and move on, so they've started to interest me a bit, but big stuff is scary. Yeah, so like if you're just into painting, then busts are a great way to go, because you can really kind of expand your stuff, and but if you don't play at all, yeah, then it makes sense to maybe head that direction. But for me, because I also do enjoy playing and having a good time with it, then I generally stay away from busts myself. Let me see here. Corvus Games Terrain says, currently working on terrain pieces for my first Kickstarter. Any tips on photographing terrain? Tripod. I like shallow depth of field, frankly, so it makes things look a little bit more kind of natural. I mean, shallow depth of field, you'll see that here, like the fact that like the booze cabinet back here is blurry and that kind of stuff. That's look up shallow depth of field, look up that kind of stuff on YouTube or Google in general, and to kind of learn about that. But I would look at getting a camera if you've already got one or not. You've probably got one that's got interchangeable lenses and stuff like that, and a tripod. And then when you take your shot, especially if you have to have the shutter stay open longer, what I do is I generally set the self timer so that you push the button and then it counts down to like 10 seconds, which would normally allow you to get into the shot. But instead what it's doing is it's just letting the camera like stop wiggling. Like if the shutter is open long enough, the actual act of you pushing the button to take the picture can make the camera wiggle a little bit, which can make your image a little bit less sharp than it should be. But if you press it and let it stop vibrating from the press and just wait until it finally hits the 10-second mark and then takes the shot, then it works out nicely that way too. So Chris asks, do you choose your color schemes off of the box art? I 3D print my models, and I don't often have color references. I almost never know what color to make things. Any suggestions? I did a video earlier this year, I think, about how to test color palettes or test color schemes for your models with like Photoshop or something like Photoshop. In the video, I actually, instead of talking about Photoshop, because Photoshop is crazy expensive and almost nobody's got it, except for nerds like me, instead I used something called Pixlr, I believe. And so Pixlr runs in a browser and it's free to use. But what you do is you take a picture of the model and then convert it to black and white and then go in on another layer and go, well, what if I made all this red? And then you go, well, what if I made this blue? And you're like, oh, that's terrible. And you can erase it and kind of stuff like that. And it allows you to sort of pick color schemes before you actually start putting down paint onto model. As far as basing things off of the box art, sometimes, but not all the time. Yeah. Like I said, I was not really doing the whole... I was not really, planning on actually following the normal canon colors that you see in the movies for the snow troopers and the scout troopers and stuff like that. So, yeah. Tabletop Oddity says, for starting Legion, you will need one of the core boxes. One for Rebels/Imperials is already out, and the Clone Wars set is probably out in September, so I'd pick a faction and build the relevant set. The core box for Clone Wars/Droids, yeah, is probably coming out in September. However, I would be willing to bet a nickel that you'll be able to pick it up at Gen Con. You'll have to stand in line for like a really long time, but I have a suspicion you'll be able to pick it up at Gen Con. So I'll be at Gen Con and I'll be paying attention to that. I doubt that I will stand in line for 3 hours so that I can pick it up when I can just get it from my local shop like a month and a half later. You know what I mean? But if I know Fantasy Flight, you'll probably be able to pick it up at Gen Con. But yeah, otherwise it should come out in September, I believe. They haven't said specifically, but that's probably what it's going to be. They said something like end of Q3 or begin something like that. Let's see here. Apollinoise. I'm not pronouncing that properly, and I apologize. Have you seen the new rank and file game from Parabellum War Games? It's called Conquest. It's 32 millimeter. Yeah, I have. I saw the models and their booth not 2 years ago. Last year, 2018, at Gamma Trade Show, and in Reno, and then I saw them again this year at Gamma, and I guess it has finally shipped, like in January or September, June or July. It's finally shipping now. So yeah, the models are kind of cool. They are bigger than normal to some degree. They're not like 28 millimeter. They're scaled a bit larger. I have some of them. They were giving away sprues at Gamma this year, so I got a couple of sprues. I want to do some paint tests with them. Oh my god, the friggin' camera again. So yeah. So that's interesting. But it is a rank and file game, meaning that they move in like rectangles, and I don't. That's not my preferred type of game. So I doubt they'll be getting into it. But I might be using some of the models for other stuff, just because they're kind of cool. All right, let's see here. Roland says, I just uncovered a whole lot of Inquisition models from GW in my garage. I know what I'm doing on my days off. Nice. Yeah, some of those old models are kind of fun, actually. I enjoy like the old Crusader model, and some of those other ones are pretty cool. Let's see here. Grimlock Steve says, has anyone seen or used the Battle Systems cardboard terrain? It looks really cool and easy to store, but I'm wondering if it is sturdy enough. I don't think I've seen... I have seen cardboard terrain before. I don't know if I've seen Battle Systems, so I don't know exactly what it is. John Ashley Smith says, repainting pre-painted minis can be fun. Used to repaint the Mech Warrior models. They had awful paint jobs, hair and crap in the finish. Yeah, I could see repainting those. They're cool. I've seen plenty of really interesting and well-done paint jobs for X-Wing, Star Wars X-Wing, which, honestly, as a pre-paint, Star Wars X-Wing was probably the best pre-paints out there. Admittedly, it is easier to paint ships than it is to paint, people to some degree, because there's just a lot more detail. You can throw washes in there, and it really, you get a lot of distance out of just throwing some washes on like a Millennium Falcon versus throwing washes on Superman. You know what I mean? So yeah, it just works out nicely that way. But you still find people who were repainting them because they wanted the color scheme to be different, or they wanted, whatever. So that's really cool. 12 Neef says, I would only play Legions if my godfather got into it, because we are big Star Wars fans and he doesn't play these games. Well, that's something to, maybe he's interested in learning about it and go in that direction. NO73 says, camera, ? Meaning, is this the camera's fault? I don't think so, because, see, when I'm talking to the lens over there, directly next to the lens, right over there is a tiny little screen that flips out of the camera, and then that's how I can see that I'm in the shot. I mean, I can see it on down here on the monitor as well. But so as I'm talking to the camera, out of just a little bit of my peripheral, if I'm not looking directly at my face, I should be looking at the lens. But anyway, that doesn't stop moving. Like, the reason that I sometimes don't notice that the camera has locked up is because the camera's not locked up. It's the screen down here that is locked up. And so I'm talking and everything seems fine, and then I happen to glance down and I'm making a stupid face, and then I'm like, yeah. So it's not the camera doing it. Now, it might be the camera sending a weird signal down, I guess, to the thing, and that may have changed, but again, that camera basically just sits there week after week after week. So I could see, like, if I dropped it or if I moved it around a bunch, or if I don't know. So I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I do want to try to figure that out. Yeah, so we'll see. Again, I'm wondering if it's maybe just the heat. The problem is that for God's sakes, if I do turn on the AC, that it's going to get a lot louder in here, and so I don't want to do that either. So I don't know. It very possibly could just be something that XSplit did. I guess I could give a try and see if it's a... because XSplit's had several updates recently, and so it could be that. It could be the actual hardware. So if I go out and drop $500 on a new piece of hardware and that doesn't fix the problem, then it's XSplit, and it's just... ugh. So I'm going to start doing a little bit more research, and more than I've already done, and try to figure it out. But yeah, I'm going to be working on some ideas. Nick Carroll says, for color schemes, I look to nature for inspiration, as the palettes found there naturally work together. Bird plumage, flowers, leaf clutter, fish scales, etc. I did a video about that a long time ago. Uncle Adam's Pro Tips, I think, about going and hitting up Google image search. Like if you're painting Tyranids are kind of like big space bugs, so go look for space bugs, or not space bugs. Go look for human bugs, not human bugs, Earth bugs, and see some color palettes that you like there, and then use those to mimic those in your Tyranids. Or let's say you're painting lizardmen, go find some actual Earth lizards, and then go, hey, that one's cool, and then you can mimic that. So yeah, that's definitely a good idea. Absolutely. Let me see here. Darson says, I am totally sold on LA's Totally Awesome. That should be that should be on their website. I don't think they have a website. Maybe they have a website. LA's Totally Awesome, for those of you that don't know, is something you can get from the dollar store. It is a yellowish fluid. It is a degreaser and cleaner. And it is, in my opinion, one of the best things for stripping models. If you want to get paint off of old models that you either bought on eBay or that you painted years ago and now you hate the paint job and you want to repaint them, or whatever the deal is, LA's Totally Awesome is totally awesome, actually. It's what it says right there on the package. And it's like $1 for a 32-ounce bottle at the dollar store, so that's also pretty cool. Real Mojo says, did you see the new Awakened Wildwood from GW? I think their range of scenery is improving. I heard about it, but I haven't seen it yet. I heard that there were new trees because they were talking about, well, with this new new Sylvaneth Battle Tome, they were like, well, what if you still have the old trees? And I just saw some headline that's like, oh, what if you still have the old trees? So I was like, oh, they must be making new trees. But I haven't actually seen pictures of them yet, so I don't know. But yeah, those old trees are cool, but they needed some work. The ones that I have, I've never put the leaves on them because they like come up and they're like a tree and they're all kind of spindly, and then they just have these flat plates of leaf cover, and they just go in on a very small point on a hole, and that's fine. But as soon as you bust that off, because it's a super flimsy little point, yeah. So I've always just decided I'm going to just make them all look like dead trees, and that'll be way easier. So that's fun. Hey, look at that. All right. Any thoughts about the FLG Journeys of Middle Earth? Thinking about pulling the trigger on, but the minis are obviously not as great as. I don't know about FLG Journeys of Middle Earth. I've not heard about that. So I can't help you there. Sorry, Jonathan. Thanos says, take a hammer to your system, hit it a few dozen times. If that doesn't work, you have a real issue. Well, yeah, I can see that. I mean, it could just be the PC as well, I guess. It's getting older, but it's not that big of a deal. That's a good question. I don't know. What else? Mr. Kavoshi, do you have a particular method on introducing new games to people who haven't gotten into tabletop games already? A friend of mine 3D prints lightsabers, and it seems like X-Wing would be a good intro. In that situation, what I would do is, if you've got the models for it, where you could play an intro game, like 100 points or whatever. Actually, now I haven't played since they've gone to version 2, so I don't know what the points are anymore. But if you can, at least, if you have enough ships to be able to have 2 forces, and then say, hey, are you interested in playing? And then you say, you can use, this is what I frequently do, is I set up both forces in whatever the game is, if it's a skirmish game or whatever, and I'm like, hey, which ones do you want to play? And then sometimes they're like, oh, I think these guys really look cool, or I remember those from the movie or the TV show or whatever, or these are neat or whatever. Then they pick, and then you say, okay, cool, I'll take the other guys. And then you play a game with them, and you teach them and go through stuff. And when they're like, I'm going to do this, and you can say, okay, you know, and a lot of times you want to kind of set up ground rules where you go, do you want me to tell you when you're doing things or when you could do things better, or do you want to learn on your own, or how do you want to, you know? If they're just like trying to play the game and you're all like, well, actually, I would do that, then you may turn them off from the concept. But if they're like, no, tell me, give me the data I need to know all the time, then when they go, I want to move this here, and you go, well, actually, it might be better to go over here, and here's the reason why, then they're like, okay, cool. But some people, as soon as you start correcting them, even though it's a thing that you know more about, sometimes they can be like, I don't want you to do that, which is great. Different people are different. So so you know, get that rolling, and then just basically play a game with them. And you know, but it's really hard to go to a friend and say, hey, you should really play this game with me, and you should go buy a bunch of stuff and then build it and paint it, and then we'll play. That's not going to usually fly. If you want to be an advocate for a game in your area and try to get more people to play, you generally are going to find that you're going to end up having to probably make at least two forces so that you can be at the game shop and be like, hey, come over here and play. I've got everything you need. Just I'm going to teach you. You know what I mean? And then maybe you get them fired up, and then they decide to start playing as well and building and whatever. But that's the way to go about it. Which is why you generally don't try to teach somebody, hey, this is how you play, you know, Apocalypse, or this is how you play 40K, or this is how you play Kings of War, something like that. You generally want to aim more towards, you know, skirmish games. Stuff like Frostgrave, maybe. Stuff like Kill Team. Stuff like Gaslands, you know, that kind of thing, where it's much smaller, because then it's much easier for you as the advocate to be able to build and paint and own and store two small armies versus two humongous armies. That's no fun. So, all right. Well, we're going into an intermission right now. Oh, no, it's back. Okay, great. Who makes the best 40K models, says Red Jack. I'm going to say Games Workshop. Probably. Unless I'm not understanding your question properly. I'm going to say probably Games Workshop, since they're the guys who make the 40K models. I mean, there are companies out there who make stuff that you can kind of use for 40K, but that's not the same thing. Let's see here. JP Got Rockets says that I use X-Wing and Song of Blades and Heroes. They are simple, need few models, and are quick to play. That's also very true, yes. Song of Blades and Heroes I teach at conventions frequently, because again, that game is elegant enough, but yet simple enough that I can teach people how to play it who've never played a miniatures game before, and they can have a lot of fun. And that's worked out quite well, actually. Joe J says, howdy, Uncle Adam. Well, hello, how you doing? Snowfight says, when you run a demo, don't kick their butts. That can turn people off quickly. That is also true. Very true, yes. I mean, sometimes nothing you can do about it, you know. Even if you're giving them lots of help, sometimes there's, you know, dice or dice. But, generally try not to stomp them and step on their necks, because that will make them not interested in playing much anymore, usually. Fahid asks, do you know the reason why GW made 8th edition 40K so much easier rules than 7th edition 40K? Was 7th edition not popular because of its vast difficulty? Yes. 7th edition 40K, like, I played it maybe twice and then kind of gave up, and I did not play any 40K at all. To be fair, I'm not playing 40K these days either. I'm mainly playing Kill Team, but it's related to 40K, so it's fine. But yeah, it's 7th edition was lousy. I was just having a conversation about this at the game shop like yesterday. And that was like just before everything started getting better over at Games Workshop. 7th edition was like in its kind of heyday. People were just, the company was just hemorrhaging players. People were going to other games and other systems and all that kind of stuff. And GW was not doing great. And then they got rid of Fantasy and started up with Age of Sigmar, which initially looked like a bad move and had a lot of backlash. But now, you know, several years later, 3-4 years later or whatever, we can look back at it and go, actually, that was a super smart move. And then along came 8th edition, which streamlined the rules, made it a lot more fun, got a lot of people back into the game that hadn't been in it before, or people who hadn't been in it for a long time, when I say getting back into, plus also introduced a lot of new people to it. And then, of course, all the other skirmishy style games like, Kill Team and the upcoming Warcry and Necromunda and all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it was because 7th edition was not great, and that's why they made 8th edition better, at least in my opinion. So, let's see here. Trying to get my friends into tabletop gaming. I was thinking about Frostgrave. If they're already into RPGs, Frostgrave is a great gateway game because there's a lot of RPG elements, like leveling up your wizard and your apprentice and stuff like that in Frostgrave, and there's spells and things like that. So you've got a lot of things that will seem familiar to them in that. You know what I mean? So that's definitely a way to go. AP Whiskey says, I left behind my 40k armies after I enlisted. Now 14 years later, living near a GW store rekindled my hobby. Should I strip and repaint my childhood minis? I mean, it's up to you if you're interested in going that direction. Depending on how long those minis have been out there, some of them might have better sculpts now. The new stuff might look a lot better. Depends on which army you were in. That's totally up to you. You may want to strip them all and repaint them because A, you're a better painter now, or B, you just want to be able to paint something you already own without having to go out and buy a bunch of new stuff, which saves you money that way. Or maybe you paint some of your older stuff, you strip it, repaint it to kind of get your practice and your painting muscle working again, and then once you get to a point where you're real happy with it, then maybe you buy some new stuff and then paint the new stuff and it looks great. That's also a good idea to go down that direction as well. Jesse Boyd asks, Uncle Adam, do you suppose GW will eventually give any more support or some of their smaller standalone games such as Speed Freaks? I don't think Speed Freaks is going to see much. Maybe something in a White Dwarf. There may be some sort of expansions in White Dwarf that they might do for it or may have already done for it. I actually haven't been paying attention to Speed Freaks much. Speed Freaks, I think, honestly, was a way to sell a bunch of orc buggies to orc players under the guise of, but this is also a tabletop, like a self-contained board game. I don't know that a ton of people bought it to play it. I think people bought it because they wanted the buggies for their orc army. But I'm sure some people probably bought it to play it. I've seen people play it, online. I've seen battle reports. I want to say Ash Barker did at least a couple of battle reports that I watched because I was interested to see what the game was like. So there's that, yeah. Jared Anderson asks, cats on the floor or on the bed at night? It depends on the cat, honestly. Also depends on the season. Right now, the cats are not sleeping with us much because it's hot. It's not. But in the winter, when it's cold, then we usually have cats in the bed because they're like, well, you guys are warm, so we're going to hang out by you. Because in the winter, like the furnace, like we've got the thermostat set so it gets down to about 61 degrees overnight. And then like a couple hours before we wake up, the furnace kicks in and starts to heat up the house again a little bit. But yeah, so then the cats, we do get cats sleeping with us and stuff. But in the summer, they're like, you guys are too hot. We're not hanging out by you. So that's kind of the way it works. Cat-related questions. Ben Puffer says, we play Dungeons & Dragons, so I think Frostgrave would be a good transition. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Pop Bernsey says, I'm surprised how much GW supports Blood Bowl. It's not as much a gateway to more Warhammer stuff, says this after buying 3 kits for Kit Bash purposes. Yeah, I mean, it's not a direct, like they have direct gateways, like Warhammer Underworlds, like Shadespire and Night Vault. Those models can be directly brought into your Age of Sigmar army, should you decide to actually have an Age of Sigmar army. So if you start out and you've been playing Shadespire and you've been loving it, and then you're looking at this and you're finding out, oh heck, I can use these models in this bigger game if I decide to go that direction, that's cool. That's a direct correlation. But getting people at least into the hobby with a game like Blood Bowl, which obviously, yeah, you can't take those Blood Bowl guys and put them into your 40k army or put them into your Age of Sigmar army or put them into your Necromunda army, I don't think. I mean, maybe you could. But with some modification. But yeah, it's still getting you into painting and collecting little people and painting them and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's something like that. How's Blitz Bowl? I'm heading to the U.S. soon, looking at picking up a copy. I, Blitzball is pretty cool. Actually, I get to play it at TMX. VJ Morph brought his orcs and no, yeah, he brought his orcs and I brought my humans. I painted up because it's like Blood Bowl but different. It's smaller. It's on a smaller board. It's only 6 models. Like as far as the orcs and humans, instead of having 12 or 13 or whatever, it's like 6 models. And it is it's an interesting thing because it's not all about just getting end zone scores. There's these other kind of cards that you have at the top from this deck, and if you if you tackle 2 people in one turn, then you can get these 2 points, and then you have that card, and then more cards come out of the pile and stuff like that. So it's a lot more frenetic because you're trying to do other things other than just score. You're scoring in a different way, but it's a cool game, and it's like cheap. It's $40, but you can only get it at like Barnes and Noble, I guess, which is a little weird. Marcus asks, do you think Warcry is Age of Sigmar Kill Team? Sort of. It's really, if anything, it is a mixture, I think, of Age of Sigmar Kill Team and Necromunda. Because if it was just straight up Age of Sigmar Kill Team, then they wouldn't bother selling any new models for it. You'd just use your normal Age of Sigmar guys, and then, like you do in Kill Team. Kill Team, you use 40k models, a limited selection, but you still use 40k models to play your armies. In this, at least so far, we have seen all these forces that have been coming out have been separate, all new sculpts. Now, that may just be for the 6 chaos warbands that they've come up with, and then maybe if you want to play Death or Stormcast, then you can use regular Age of Sigmar models that you may already have, or they may keep selling boxes, kind of like Necromunda. Necromunda, you can't use your normal 40k guys. They make these boxes. You buy a box of Van Saar or whatever, or Eschers or whatever, and then boom, you're done. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know how they're doing it, but it's more of a mix, in my opinion, of it has the 3-dimensional terrain of Kill Team and the small group sizes, but it's more along the lines of you buy a box of models and they're very different from anything else, kind of like Necromunda, So there you go. Let me see. I see all this talk about Blitzball. Need to find this. Might use it for my sports ball loving friends if it plays faster than Blood Bowl. It does. It does play faster than Blood Bowl. Yeah, if you can find it, definitely give it a try. The Animaster says, compared to spray can primers, I've yet to come across a good airbrush primer. So far, Stynylrez seems better than the others, but can still be scratched off with fingernails. Yeah, pretty much almost any primer you can scratch off with a fingernail if you try hard enough. I would not normally be trying to scratch off stuff from my paint jobs with fingernails. Now, like a lot of the Krylon, if you use a Krylon primer, they do have a technology that's supposed to make it bind directly to plastics, which makes it so you can't scratch it off. The downside I find with Rattlecan is then you run the risk of getting kind of powdery looking models depending on how you do it. I prefer the airbrush primer usually on models because it does have a tendency to be smoother, and because it also, yeah, you're right. If I could probably scratch it off, but my plan is to not try to scratch it off. So that's why I paint it and then I varnish. The varnish can help with that as well. And then just generally don't try to scratch the paint off your models. That's my thing. Now, I do have a tendency to prefer to use Rattlecan on terrain because terrain can get bumped and scraped and things can happen to it, and moving it back and forth between shelves and tables and things like that. And so, yeah, in that situation, I definitely, am on the same page with you. But for the normal models, I just try not to scratch off the primer too much. But it depends. And also, one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of airbrush primers, too, is because I live in Wisconsin, and it's either too humid or too cold a lot of the portion of the year for me to be able to go outside with a Rattlecan and prime. So, and then it's just really nice to be able to just do one model. You know what I mean? Like if I go outside to Rattlecan prime with just one model, I feel like I'm wasting a ton of paint. Whereas if I just use an airbrush, I put like 5 drops of airbrush primer. And I generally use Vallejo airbrush primer, so I don't know if you've had a chance to use that, but I find it sticks pretty well. I've had it come off before, but I know I've had the Vallejo airbrush primer come off, but it was because it was on a metal model and I dropped that model. So it scraped off some primer. But otherwise, I've never had primer come off, really, from my airbrush stuff. But again, I'm not trying to scrape it off with my fingernails, so, yeah. Let me see here. Cyber Anime Alien. Cyber Anime Alien. There we go. Where can I find 40k/Kill Team games? The app showed nothing, and there are no GWs near me. Well, it depends, I guess, on where you live. Sometimes the Game 4 app does not have stuff in your area because there's not stuff in your area. Or maybe there's stuff in your area, but the stores in your area, if you have stores in your area, aren't aware of the app and aren't putting their events and things like that into the app. So in that situation, if you do have stores nearby, then what I would tell you to do is go tell those stores about Game 4. They can sign up for free and become verified and start putting their events in there, and then that'll potentially help. If you don't have any stores near you at all, Games Workshop or otherwise, then it may be hard to find. Now, that being said, in the Game 4 app, there is the main screen that always pops up is called Game Events, but there's another screen you can get to through the menu or across the top up there, and it is called Looking for Players. And Looking for Players is kind of like almost like it's like when you go to the game store and there's like a cork board at the back of the game store, and they have these little 3x5 cards sometimes, and someone will write, hey, looking for a looking for a third player or a fifth player for our, Dungeons and Dragons campaign we play on Tuesday nights called Jerry or whatever. And then, it's almost like a classified ad. So Looking for Players is a place where you can put in and say, hey, I want to play Kill Team or 40K, and these are the stores that I'll play at or whatever. And then other people using the app can look at it and see that you're doing that, and they can send you a message in the app. They don't have to. They don't get your phone number. They don't get your email or anything like that. It's messaging within the app, so that's cool and safe and private. And then you can set up something like, I've talked to dozens and dozens of folks now who have gotten into gaming groups, got into finding people locally that they play the same game because of the app. But if there's nothing in the events area, it's very frequently because either there's not very many stores near you, or the stores aren't aware of the app yet and aren't putting stuff in. Of the 6,500 game stores in the world that we've got in our current database, about more than 500 are verified now, meaning they've signed up, but not all of them still are putting their events in and all that kind of stuff. So that's as it grows, we'll get more people and you'll find more events. But in between that, Looking for Players is really a good place to start. You can, even if there's nobody like around you too close, then put in your own. Because sometimes people don't put in their own thing saying, hey, I'm looking to play for this. They just look for the Looking for Players area, and they don't want to make the first step. So if you make the first step and go, look, I want to play Kill Team 40K. I like to play at these stores. There's a little thing in there where you can set what stores you might want to play at. We generally want people to play at stores, especially on their first meeting, because you don't want weird random people coming to your house and eating your family or whatever. You know what I mean? So if it comes to a public place like a store that's in the database, that I think helps. So anyway, that's where that's at. That's my pitch for Game 4. And I think that was let's see here. Joseph says, just thought of something where the camera is concerned. When you get done with the show, look at the Windows event log viewer. It may give you a list of the lockups and what to fix it. Well, that's a good idea. I'm going to take a picture of that. Boop. There we go. So I can remember it after the show. Gloss after priming or after all the colors are on. I generally like to put varnish on after I've done painting. Now, sometimes you may want to throw down, like you may be partially done painting and then you throw a gloss varnish everything because you're going to be doing some new process and you want to protect the stuff that's underneath it, like if you're going to be using oil washes or other advanced things like that. But for standard stuff, generally you usually want to do the varnish at the end. John Ashley Smith says, is there an inexpensive starter for Blitz Bowl? Well, Blitz Bowl is the inexpensive starter, right? Like I said, I think it's $40 for the game, and it comes with 6 humans and 6 orcs. At least I think that's how much it cost. Let me see here. Yes. Someone else responded. Frankie Lee Bailey says that Blitz Bowl is the inexpensive starter. It's about $40. You get 12 models, dice cards, and the game mat, the thing you play on. Yep, absolutely. What else? VJ Morph says, eating, I thought you would go for Cheetos, but no, Adam goes dark, your family. Well, yeah, I mean, it's people ask us from time to time, they're like, well, why do you make it so that they have to, why do you make it so that the default is that you meet at a game store? And we're like, because we want people to be safe, and game stores are public places. So if you start a game group or club in the Game 4 app, the people who are in your group and club, you can make an event at a private location, whether it's your house. Let's say you want to have a cookout and board game night. Great. But the only people who can see that event are the people that are already okayed to be in your group and club. That way you don't just get random folks showing up at your house with, a package of hot dogs and possibly who knows what else, a knife, I don't know, or something like that. Or even just, the idea is that we want people to be safe. That's the main thing. So if you're going to be having an event for your gaming club, you can have it at a store, automatically easy. We've got 6,500 stores worldwide that you can easily just go, yep, that's my closest store, and we're going to have our club event there. Great. But let's say your club meets at a church basement or at an Applebee's or who knows whatever. Then as the person who is a moderator for the club, you can say, we always meet at this Applebee's, and there's a thing in the admin section where you can submit the Applebee's address to us. We get it, check on Google to make sure it is actually an Applebee's and not somebody's murder basement or whatever, and then we okay it for your club. So now your club can say, hey, Thursday night board games at Applebee's, and then and then it can be a public event. So that way you can recruit new people for your club. So people who are looking through the game events will say, hey, there's a board game night at Applebee's on Thursdays. Interesting. And they can show up, and now maybe you've got a new person for your club. So we want people to be able to have games pretty much any public place that they want, and we want people to be able to have games that in private residences if they want, but those are only for club members. You can't publicize those. So yeah, because again, safety. We're interested in people not being eaten in general. So there's that. Paul Noxie says, I used Game 4 while visiting Warhammer World, wanted to find some local independent stores, and it worked a treat. Yeah, that's one of the big benefits, too, of the Game 4 app is that it is, we have this store finder. So anywhere you travel, if you're a person who travels a lot, you can pull out the thing and find the closest tabletop gaming store out of currently 6,500 worldwide. When we first launched the app, we had what we thought was a pretty extensive list, and it was 5,800 stores. And now, over the last year, not quite year and a half, we're up to 6,500 stores. So it's probably the biggest, most complete listing of tabletop gaming stores on the planet. So that's also a benefit as well. Let's see here. JP Got Rocket says, if you're having trouble scratching paint off your models, primer coat, etc., make sure you clean your models before painting. Plastic needs to be washed with soap and water. Use vinegar on metal. I don't do that enough, and I think that you're probably right. I probably ought to do it a little bit more. I always wash resin because I know that resin's like the worst offender. If you're ever, let's say, doing, Forge World or any other kind of resin stuff, that stuff really needs to be cleaned with soap and water, because otherwise you will, the powder that they put inside the mold so that the resin doesn't stick to the inside of the mold, it's called mold release powder. That stuff, paint does not want to stick to that at all. So you definitely want to clean that stuff. I've not done it much with plastic, but if you are having trouble with it, then it's maybe something to look into. And I've never used vinegar on metal models before, but that's not a bad idea. Sturmhawk says, what's Applebee's? It's a chain restaurant. People play, we're amazed by the different places that people have their board game nights and stuff like that, like normal club events. In our area, there's a grocery store, and there's these people that get together and play board games at the grocery store, because the grocery store has like a community room like in the back or upstairs or something like that, so you can like use it for free because it's a community room, and as long as you like register and say we're going to do it on Thursday nights, and that's where they get together and play their board games. It's one of the clubs in this local area, which is very cool. So yeah. Let me see here. What else have we got? Nick Carroll says, Game 4 has led me to stores all over the world. Love it. Would be great for users to be able to verify stores too, though, at some level, and or leave reviews. Yeah, we didn't want to do the reviews thing because we didn't want to get into, like, the Yelp business area. The other thing, too, is that a lot of gamers can sometimes be, I want to say opinionated, but I'm also going to say vindictive. And you know, there are times when gamers get angry at a store, and then it's a thing, and you know, we just didn't want to have to get in the middle of that. So we haven't decided to really do any kind of rating of stores. We kicked around the idea, but we've decided against it, at least at this point. So yeah. Jared Anderson says, what's the best way to throw money at you? You got me back into the hobby after way too long and have provided endless hours of distraction while painting. I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know that there's a... I mean, you could... I got shirts. We've got t-shirts available at this link here, bit.ly/merchbunker. And you can go there. This is an example of one of the shirts. It's it's what I call the punk rock shirt, and it says Pachow. And there's other shirts as well. This is another picture of the same shirt. I've got 5 different shirts on there, and I'm working on some more, and I know that I'm behind on that, but I've been traveling a lot. I'm getting closer. Another thing that you can do if you're interested, and the upside here is that you're also getting a thing. You're not just throwing money, you're getting a shirt. People like shirts. You got to cover up your torso, right? The other thing is you can help support the channel through Patreon, patreon.com/tabletopminions. I've got like 3 tiers. There's like the $1 tier, the $2 tier, and the $4 tier. The $1 tier is basically just like, oh, I use ad blocker, and I want to just, you know, I use ad blocker on, let's say, YouTube, but I want to give you some money, just a little bit. Ad blocker forgiveness is what a lot of people call it, which is fine. The $2 tier is, you got, you know, like I post some things from time to time and stuff like that, and you get access to that, and it's just a little bit more support. The $4 tier, which is known as Uncle Adam's Irregulars, that's where you also get access to the Discord channel. So we've got a Discord channel, and a lot of people here in the chat are part of that, and it's kind of a great feature that works out really well, but it's just for the Uncle Adam's Irregulars, like $4 folks. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, that's the way it goes. Otherwise, I don't have like I have a PayPal, but I don't have a PayPal set up for the channel or anything like that. So yeah, that's to answer your question there. But I appreciate it very much if you're interested. Jared says, "Oh my God, that picture is amazing." Yeah, it's so this is some of the folks who came to TMX went to this bar with me. Actually, it's called the Reptile Palace in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It's owned by friends of mine. It's one of my favorite bars. This is the men's bathroom, and in there I am pretending to prime, I think it's a Primaris Ancient, actually, with that banner down there. This picture, I wanted it to be kind of a high contrast, black and white, kind of punk rock type photo. I paid a friend of mine who's a professional photographer, Mary Manchester. She does great work, and I paid her to take these shots, and then this is a shot in the studio. You can kind of see some of the lighting and all that kind of jazz, and the microphone and all that stuff. But yeah, so we did that shoot, I don't know, back in the winter, and it was a lot of fun. So, but yeah, I've got new stuff. I was actually working on one of the designs a little bit yesterday, so I've got new designs coming. But yeah, definitely. Sam says, took your advice to start the first steps toward making a group since I couldn't find one. Work at a place with over 1,500 staff. HR found us a space to use, and we now have a gaming club monthly. Well, awesome. See, that's the trick. Is a lot of people will be like, oh, I can't find a club. I can't find people to play with and stuff. And it does take, in a lot of situations, a little bit of, inertia to get it, momentum to get it moving. And so sometimes you have to decide whether or not you're going to be that momentum or not. You know what I mean? So I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you got a gaming club. Let's see here. Edward asks, are there any tips you can give to help with painting other than practice? Well, I mean, thin your paints. I would definitely tell you to watch the wet palette video, building yourself a cheap wet palette out of a little sandwich container and some paper towel and some baking parchment. Man, does that help. I was just recently doing some painting without a wet palette, and I was like, yeah, this is why I always like to use a wet palette, because of this reason. I was like, you put some paint on like a piece of plastic or whatever, and then you come back to it like a minute and a half later and it's all dry. And you're like, oh, that's right, that doesn't happen when I use a wet palette. So definitely look at wet palette. Even if you don't like thin your paints a ton, if you just use the wet palette a little bit to thin your paints, it helps a ton. It really does, because your paint doesn't dry out so quickly as you're trying to work with it. That's a big deal, I think. So. Frankie Lee Bailey says, wasn't there a promise of doing a double Nick Raimondo shirt for Emily? I think that VJ Morph was also a witness, just saying. I might be able to pull that off. I got to get the first one done first. But yeah, definitely. Let's see here. What else? Daniel asks, has he talked about Legion already? Yes, I did kind of actually talk about Legion earlier on. Just to recap, the reason I'm kind of getting into Legion finally is A, because there are some people in my local area that are starting to play. So that's a benefit. B, I wanted something that I thought that... I've always been a Star Wars guy. I've always been a Star Wars fan, so there's that too. But I also wanted to find a game that I thought, if I start talking about it a little bit more on the channel, it can be a good entry point for, again, beginners. A lot of the stuff that I talk about on this channel is about how to get people into the hobby, how to I'm focusing on getting new people into the wargaming hobby, whether it's the playing or the painting. Those models are easy to build generally, the Star Wars models, Star Wars Legion models. They're not necessarily the highest quality, but they're easy to build and they're inexpensive. And so those are two benefits, I think. So that's one of the reasons. Plus, I enjoyed, all the different aspects of the terrain and the whatever. And it's a decent game. It's very different from 40K. It's very different from Age of Sigmar. It's very different from a lot of those types of games. It's very Fantasy Flight in that instead of like, here's a bunch of numerical stats of what this guy does, instead it's a lot of icons and, whatever. But it's still a decent game. Custom dice, yeah, okay. But I don't know. Sometimes custom dice can be very usable and make a lot of sense. There are times also when you could just use like a 10-sider, and then like there was this game that Cool Mini or Not used to make called Wrath of Kings, which I was a big fan of. Wrath of Kings, the card for each of your models had this scale down the side that went from like 1 to 0. Okay, and when someone attacked you with a D10, that's what they had to use to hit you. They rolled a 6, and then you went on the chart and said, okay, well, 6 means this, whereas maybe 5 means something else, whereas 7 means something else. In 40K, it's all about you need to just roll better than this, and maybe sometimes like if you roll a natural 6, you get some extra special thing that goes off because of your weapon. If you're a sniper, on the wound roll of 6, you do a mortal wound plus whatever damage you do. Great. But for the most part, it's just like try to beat this number. Wrath of Kings, it was all about like, this happens, this didn't do anything, this, and there's variation. It's not just everything gets worse as the number gets higher. There's a little bit different there. This is the same thing with a lot of the games. Well, if you look at Shadespire from Warhammer Underworlds, some of the stuff it's either hit or you didn't hit, or it's you only hit if you had a friend with you, which would be hard to do on a normal, like you'd have to make this very kind of weird chart to say roll an 8-sider, and on a 7 this happens, on an 8 this happens, and on a 6 this didn't do anything, and it would be a hard chart to keep track of. The concept of just making these custom dice is that, well, there you go, now this symbol means this, and it's relatively simple to do. It depends on how you write your game, but there's some benefit to it. I used to be completely against custom dice. As soon as I saw custom dice, I was like, well, that's stupid. But if it's not just a sliding scale of like I hit you even harder, then it makes sense why like I hit you, I didn't hit you, this is only I hit you if I had 2 friends with me, that kind of thing. Makes sense. The Animaster says wet palettes, OMG, do not paint without them. I agree. Wet palette is spectacular. So if you haven't got a chance, get yourself a wet palette, put it together. You can make it out of like the little Glad sandwich thing that you get from the grocery store, and some paper towel and some baking parchment and some water, and then you're done. It's a great thing. Vanguard says, I had no idea that people played 40K at my local hobby store until I asked the owner. It seems super dead, but I guess that they're just quiet about it. if you're not at the game store all the time, they could be playing at different times that you don't know. You're only there maybe sometimes on Sundays, but maybe they play Friday nights or whatever. Definitely, if you're trying to find people to play with in your local area, if you're not using the Game 4 app or the Game 4 app's not working out for you or whatever the deal is, another good resource is to talk to the people that work and own your game store, your local game store. Go in there and say, hey, is anybody playing this? Because they'll know, because they'll see those people coming into the store and playing the games and using the terrain and buying more models and stuff like that. And so the people who work at the game store are always a great resource for finding out what's being played in your area. Now, they don't know everything. Like in Magic the Gathering, years ago I was at a seminar with a guy from Wizards of the Coast, and he was telling us all kinds of stuff. It was like a retailer seminar, and I was there with a friend of mine who's a retailer. And in this seminar, the guy from Wizards of the Coast, makers of Magic the Gathering, told us that over the last 20 years they've been doing surveys and marketing this and that and the other thing and figuring all this stuff out. And they believe that of all the people who buy Magic cards, whether you're buying them at the local store, you're buying them at Target, you're buying them at Walmart, you're buying them online, whatever, out of all the people who buy Magic cards, 95% of those people never play an event in a store, which literally made the people who were retailers in the audience, several of them gasped, like literally like, what? And there was a gasp because, yeah, like, and I was talking again yesterday at the game shop to my friend who's the retailer, and he's like, yeah, he says, I have people come in all the time and buy stuff for me, and then I never see them at events, but that's because they're playing at home. They're playing in groups, they're playing Commander with 3 other friends, and they play in their living room on a Saturday night, and they have some beers, and they have a great time, and they play Commander, and they do it every weekend, and they never come in to play at the store because they don't, that's just not what they're into. Those groups can be kind of hard to get into, obviously. You kind of need to know somebody generally. But there are also people who do play at the store, but they also like to play at home and that kind of stuff. And so the store is still a very good place to start from if you're trying to find people in your local area. If you've got a game store nearby, go to the game store and ask, and they will be able to tell you. I was going to drink this coffee when I picked it up, but then I forgot to. Apollonius says, loved Wrath of Kings, mechanics and minis. Bummer didn't go far. Yeah. I loved the sculpts, though they were also kind of a weird restic that I was talking about earlier, which is a mixture of resin and plastic. So sometimes the sculpts weren't... the sculpts were cool. The material was sometimes a little hard to work with, but not too bad. I had a House Hadros army, which is basically fish people. Really, try and stop me. Technically, they were more jellyfish people, but nonetheless, it was still pretty cool. And loved that. And I did like the mechanics quite a bit as well, yeah. George asks, have you gotten to play Hellboy yet? Really tempted to pick up a copy now that it's out in the wild. I haven't, but there was a guy who was running it at TMX back in the beginning of June, and he had people playing and stuff, and he had, his stuff was painted really well. He had tons of painted stuff. It was really nice. Really looking forward to it. My wife wants to play it too, because we're both big Hellboy fans. What else? What have we got here? Travis asks, doing an Adeptus Custodes kill team. Bought a box of Custodian Wardens, 2 axes, 2 spears. What should I give the shield captain, spear or axe? I am not, sadly, you do not want to ask me for advice like that. I'm not the guy to answer. Hopefully somebody else in the chat can be better equipped to give you that answer, but I'm not good at strategy or list building or anything. So yeah, not a good idea. Frozen Throg says, I live uncomfortably far away from any store or place where I can play. I can understand that 95%. Yeah, absolutely. I think that to some degree, a lot of the people that I see who say, I don't want to play in the game store, if they're adults, it's because they want to play with other adults and maybe have a beer, and maybe be able to swear a little bit and not be concerned about younger kids and things like that. There are very few game stores that allow booze. There are some, that are basically like a mixture of actually a game store and a bar. We'll look at Warhammer World. They've got a bar in there, right? But at least here in America, you don't see a ton of them. You see some. You're starting to see barcades a lot, where you can play, old video games or even new video games, and also it's a bar. That's cool. Maybe you'll start to see it more. There's cafes. There's like gaming cafes. One of the big ones out in Marietta, Georgia, which is right out by by Atlanta. Gigabytes Cafe. A shout out to those folks. That's like a 9,000 square foot store. It's a humongous store, and also they've got food. So it's cool. But I know a lot of guys that like to play. Like I used to, when I first started getting into 40K, I was playing Garage Hammer with friends because we could just hang out and play there and use, one guy's terrain and stuff like that, and have a beer and have a good time and whatever, and that's fine. But the idea is that if those groups do have, sometimes they're very insular and we're just going to play with the four of us and we're cool with that. But sometimes they also want to get other people involved. And so sometimes maybe they bump into somebody who's also playing and they're like, hey, you should come to our place or whatever. I mean, that's how I got into that group. Yeah, I don't know. I think that sometimes you get groups that are like, but if we just got more people, I'd have more people to play against. And we could start off by meeting at first at the game shop and playing. And then if you're cool, well, then maybe we'll invite you over and you can come and play with us at some other point or whatever. And that's kind of where not only the game shop thing, but also hopefully, we hope that the Game 4 app can also help with that kind of thing for those types of folks. Daniel says, what commanders do you run in Legion and command card setup? I've not really gotten the hang of command cards yet, so I've not really done that too much yet. As far as my Empire army, it's Veers, run General Veers, good old General Veers. And he is going to be my main guy for Empire. I do not see myself running Darth Vader because he is, as I mentioned earlier, way too many points. My Rebel list is definitely Leia. And I've got one list built that's Leia and another list built that's Leia and Luke. I think the benefit of Luke is that I do like the concept. He's not crazy expensive, but I can still get him out there and do some messing around. Like, you have to pay attention to Luke, you know what I mean? If I send him up and start heading him towards you, you've got to focus fire on him, because otherwise he will get in amongst your folks and really ruin your day. So I can totally understand that. So yeah, that's kind of, but I'm kind of back and forth about whether I think I'm going to have two different lists and kind of bop back and forth as far as the Rebels are concerned, but my at least starting list for Empire is definitely Veers and then no other commanders right now. Let's see here. Nick Carroll says, I got the gorgeous Shale Han starter last week and I'm modding it for Blood Bowl. Ooh, that's cool. Shale Han is Wrath of Kings. Sucks that they individually baggy every mini, though. Why not leave it on the sprue? It's a process. It's the same thing with the current setup for Star Wars Legion. Star Wars Legion, when you buy a box, you say a box of Stormtroopers, you get 7 little baggies, and it's got all the guys already put in there, and then you know exactly which arms go with which body, and you just go boop, and you go. It's very easy. But it's part of the process that they're not on the sprue. I don't know why, but it is because of the type of plastic. It's that kind of thing. Johnny English says, we have a GW store in almost every town and city in the UK. Very expensive now, though. Hard to find general board games stores, however. Yeah, I've heard that in the UK, like, there used to be, like, I've heard that it is hard to find independent game stores because they initially were kind of, I don't want to say run out of town by GW, but it used to be kind of different in that GW sold all kinds of games way back in the day. And then when that became the whole deal and all the stores were basically GW, then they stopped selling everybody else's games except their own, and then there you are. But, yeah, in the United States, like right now in the entire state of Wisconsin where I live, there are, I think, 3 GWs. No, 4. I think there's 4 GW stores, but they're all in the southern part of the state for the most part. The most recent one they did put in is about an hour and 15 minutes drive away from me. So that is kind of close-ish in comparison. But I also have 2 stores right here in town that have pretty extensive GW, stock. And then there's another store in the city that I work in, which is about a 25-minute drive away, which also has very extensive GW stock. All 3 of those are all independent stores. So I don't particularly miss not having a GW store in town. But yeah, I got plenty of places. And the upside, too, is that all those independent stores have places to play. whereas a lot of GW stores in Wisconsin or in America don't, because they're so small. They sometimes have one table, but that's about it. Anyway, let's see where we at. About I got 15 minutes left, roughly. Daniel Beam says, I played a game the other day where my opponent put Luke in this land speeder. He just drove Luke right up the table at speed 3, then dumped him on me. I lost hard. Yeah, that's I think that they're changing some rules. I was listening to one of the podcasts recently, and I don't know about the land speeder, but definitely with the tank. Because what people were doing is they were putting Emperor Palpatine in the tank and then driving the tank backwards for some reason, whatever, and then you could just dump him out and then he would cause havoc. And I think that they're tweaking that in the rules. But I'm not. Don't take that for my word. I just, like I said, I was listening and painting. I think I was actually airbrushing. So I know that they are tweaking the rules from time to time. So I think it's important to tweak the rules. You know, whenever you come up with a rule set, there's always somebody who's going to come up with a way to break it. You know what I mean? That you just didn't see. So that's definitely the way it works. Callum says, I'm from near Macclesfield, and my local GW store closed, but Element Games have a shop near me, and it's huge. Yeah, I've heard of Element Games. They're like a big-ish chain, or a chain kind of, I think, in the UK. I know they also do online stuff, too. So Corvus says that there's only 2 GW shops in the whole of Ireland. So yeah, I think that it's just the UK where they're super dense, and the other parts in the world, not so much. Travis Becker says, I de-sprue and bag all of my minis. Looks like little tiny dime bags. Yeah, I can see that. That's probably about, I was going to say about as expensive, but no, maybe not. Depends on what you buy, I guess. Yeah, so I don't know. I kind of like the little baggy thing going on. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of, it's not that I enjoy like the GW style where you have a sprue and you go through all that stuff, but then I don't know. I think that for a beginner too, definitely, like there've been plenty of times as a person who's been doing this for a long time when you're looking at like 2 or 3 different sprue frames and you're just trying to find number 26 and you're like, well, hey, this is all the other 20s, but 26 isn't there. Where's the other? And you're looking and you flip them over as the numbers in the back, and that can take a lot of time. And that just even if you're looking for a minute, if you have to look for every part for a minute, and there are a lot of parts, sometimes it can take it just makes things take a lot longer to put together. But like the Stormtroopers, man, like you've got head, body, and legs, one piece, arms attached to gun, another piece. They're in the bag. You just go boop, put some glue in there, stick it in there, you're done. I mean, obviously you want to get mold lines and junk like that off if you can. But that's, I think, a big benefit to something like that, at least again for newer players, because, and even for people like I said myself, it's just I was able to crank through those squads pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm kicking around the idea of making a video. Once I get it all nailed down, I'm thinking about making a video about how I painted my Stormtroopers. I tried to make it as quick of a process as possible, and I did use. Somebody, I think in the comments earlier, asked if I used contrast on them, and I did. I used the Apothecary White contrast paint, and I used the Black Templar contrast paint, and those have worked out quite well for Stormtroopers specifically. I think that the other troopers that I want to do, because I'm going to be using more sand colors and things like that, I don't know if contrast paints will work as well. I'm also painting General Veers right now, which I don't have a picture of, and it didn't turn out as nicely as I would have liked. I mean, he's not done yet, but I primed him gray because his sleeves and pants and all that stuff are kind of gray. And then I painted, like, he's got this big honking chest plate thing. It's all black, which I painted a super dark gray with Vallejo black gray, basalt gray. I forget which one. Black gray, I think. And then I did his helmet and his boots. But then I went through and did a black wash on all the like lighter gray of the cloth, and it did not work out as well as I would have liked. So I may end up maybe painting him over again. I don't know. Not sure. Not as great as I would have liked. That's just the fact. But I can maybe save it. Or else it just looks like he's been like real dirty. Like, I am a big fan of making models, especially if they are in combat, if they are combat models. Like if you're painting like just like a bust or like an elven princess doing elven princess stuff or whatever, then great, it should be very clean and smooth, and I get that. But if I'm painting a soldier that is out in the field and he or she is out fighting and killing and got gore on them and whatever, or even just dirt, I mean, like, these guys, you'll notice around their feet, because they're standing in desert, like I went through and dry brushed the same color that I did for the desert stuff. I dry brushed it kind of subtly around their feet to make it look like they've been walking around in the desert. And there's a bunch of like sand, like kind of sort of like, whether it's static electricity because they're covered in plastic or whatever, but it's stuck to their like, boots and their legs, I guess, calf armor, whatever you call that. But yeah, the idea was to make them look like they're part of the base. And so I always like to grunge up my models if they, so these guys are a little darker. They're not the perfect, pristine white that you see in the movies. But more often than not, those guys are walking around on the Death Star. You don't get to see them in the midst of like a big, hard ground battle too frequently. You know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons why I did that. So anyway. What else are we talking about here? Let's see. People talking about... Just saw the title. Really glad you're getting into Legion. Yeah, I've been enjoying it so far. I mean, and I'm enjoying building the stuff and kind of coming up with lists. I found a website called Tabletop Admiral, I think is what it's called. And it's designed for, I think, what the heck is it? Imperial Assault? Is that like that first kind of skirmishy kind of game that Fantasy Flight did? Yeah, Imperial Assault. So you can build your armies in Imperial Assault. You can build, I think, X-Wing armies? I could be wrong on that. But you can also build your Legion armies. So there's it's like a web-based, army builder, which is kind of nice. And it has like all the cards and stuff, so you can go, well, do I want to use this or do I want to use that? You can see the cards and go, okay. And so that's sort of nice. I like that. I've been using that to kind of do a little bit of list hammering, and trying to figure out which way I want to go with. So yeah, that's a cool thing. I think again, it's called Tabletop Admiral. I play Wild West Exodus with my wife since no one else seems to like it. I live in a small town in Crete, Greece, so not many wargamers. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, that's the kind of alternate history, kind of weird Wild West kind of game. Was originally done by the folks from Battlefoam, originally designed kind of by them, and then now it is a company called War Cradle, I think, that handles it. It's an English company. So yeah, I have not played the new version. I've watched some demos at like Gen Con and stuff, but I've not played in the new version. I played a couple of demos, the original version, the old version. So again, like at Adepticon, I played in a demo or something like that, like at their booth, but that's about it. Do you recommend magnetizing turret weapons for Astra Militarum tanks? I've never done it. I mean, if that's what you want to do. I've never. I don't know. If you think you're going to change your weapons quite a bit, then sure. It can be a lot of work in some situations depending on the model, but I've not done it. Sometimes in a lot of list building situations, you can be like, yeah, this turret has the ability to have 3 different weapons, but this one is obviously the best one, and then I don't see the point to magnetize. But if you want to be able to swap things a lot, or if you're like future proofing, where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to understand that maybe there's a new codex out in 3 years, and then I won't have to go and maybe they'll make it so I know this weapon's actually useful, whereas right now it's not. Then you can be able to swap easily, but then you have to also hope that you still remember where those weapons are if you're not using them too much. I've magnetized some things, but I haven't magnetized stuff in a long time, and I have not magnetized tanks ever. I think I've only magnetized folks. Like I've magnetized like arms on, so I can take this entire arm off and put on a different arm that's got a different gun on it. I've done that, but I've never magnetized any vehicles. Nick says, played my first game of Kill Team today. Won as Thousand Suns versus Tau. I've played my first game I played my first game against Thousand Suns back in late May, just before I started doing all the traveling and all that stuff. And Thousand Suns are cool. I kind of want to build a set. I don't like the Zangors. Like, I just don't physically like, or I don't like visually like the look of the models. I would go just straight Rubric Marines, but they're pretty cool. Let me see here. Sand Troopers were grimy shipboard troops are shiny boys. That makes sense. I get that, yeah. Let's see here. John Ashley Smith says, when I am done constructing a box of minis, or really any kit, I clip off all the leftover bits to put in my spare boxes. Start doing this and soon you'll have quite the collection of useful stuff. Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're into specifically like GW. Games Workshop loves to give you lots of options in some of the kits. Not all, but in some of the kits they'll give you lots of options. So if you don't throw those options away, you just clip them and then keep them in those little plastic, like clear plastic things that you put like fishing tackle in, that's like, it's got all the little compartments and all that jazz. You can then later on be like, I'm trying to build a guy and I need him to have this kind of head. I got a whole bucket full of heads here in this little, container, or special guns or whatever you got. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff going on. But yeah, saving those bits is really a super smart idea, and getting them off the sprues is really good, because then otherwise you just got boxes of sprues you have to dig through. Whereas if it's all in one place, you can just pop it open and look through the bin for heads or guns or whatever, capes, I mean, that kind of stuff, then it's a way to go, definitely. Torch says, I magnetized my AT-ST options. Had to open the boxy head, but it worked out well. Yeah, I've been thinking about whether I was going to magnetize some of the weapon options on the AT-ST. I don't know. I kind of honestly see myself generally always running it pretty weapon heavy, but I don't know yet. I may actually try to do it that way. VJ Morph says, there's no need to future-proof if you play by the rule of cool. That is also very true. If you're super concerned about competitive, or like what's the most efficient build or whatever, then that's a different story. But if you're just like, I use these missile launchers because they look awesome, yeah, but they're garbage in the game, I don't care, I mean, that's fine. It depends on whether you like to play competitively or not, but yeah, definitely. Glenn says that I'll want to magnetize my weapons for the AT-ST. I will definitely look into it, yeah, absolutely, because like I said, that's the only thing that I could see in Legion probably that I would think about. Tyler says, I am building Disciples of Tzeentch as alternates to Zangors. I hate the Zangor models too. I don't know what it is. I mean, they're technically good models. They're technically well built, well designed. It's just the weird bird heads. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't like them. I just don't like the look of them. So yeah, yeah, that's I get that. I could see making, yeah, you could do cultists, you could do all kinds of strange things, and counts as Zangors. That's why I would see doing that. Yeah, definitely. JP Gotrocket says, I'm going to magnetize my Imperial Knights. Can't afford multiples on various loadouts. Actually, now that you mention it, I did magnetize something recently. Well, recently-ish. I built not the Repulsor. That I didn't magnetize. What's the Redemptor Dreadnought? The big, like, kind of Primaris-style Dreadnought. I magnetized the gun on the right arm. You can swap between, like, this big Gatling cannon or this kind of plasma gun. And I did magnetize that. I also did it a bit poorly, so it sort of wiggles a little bit, which makes me a little nuts. But yeah, that's what I did. Uncle Adam, do you have a tutorial for the desert bases? Not really. I will, if I do the Stormtrooper video, I'll probably put that in there too. I mean, it's basically just it's the, what do you call it? Baking soda and CA glue. I did a video about baking soda and CA glue a while back. You can find how I do my baking soda bases, I think is the name of the video, something like that. And then it's just a simple, like, color. I forget what color exactly, but then I threw a sepia wash over it, and then I went back and dry brushed with the base, like, starter color again, and then did a little bit of bleach bone on the most raised parts, and that's pretty much about it. But yeah, it's a pretty simple, actually it's a very simple base. I did add also a little bit of kitty litter, like the bigger chunks are actually little bits of kitty litter. But yeah, all that information as far as the style of the material, that's in that baking soda video. So Glendine 6 says, well, if you build the Rebel land speeder, magnetize Splemo Magnabutt. I think you made that up. I really do feel, I hope you made that up. Splemo Magnabutt is a terrible name. And so I hope that you're just messing with me, but I'll take a look. I've seen that model, but I've not really looked at it very closely. If the guy's name is actually Splemo Magnabutt, then I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on there. That's weird. AJR says, got 6 knights. 3 will be Nurgle and 3 House Herpetrax. Probably Herpetrax. Along with 4 Armigers. Gonna be sweet. That's a lot of big Robo boys there. That'll be fun. J Solo Art says, hello, Uncle Adam. I slept through most of the show. I'll have to watch later. That's fine too. I got no problem with that. I hope that you had a good rest. But yeah. I just found your card, actually, J Solo Arts. I was cleaning out something, and I just came across your card. If I remember, I want to say that we met at Gen Con outside, but I could be wrong. But I think that's right. Looking forward to Gen Con, by the way, as well. Another 2 weeks, and I'll be there. So, oh gosh, you're right, Deanna Master. My camera is reminding me of the time. That's a good point. It is 11 a.m. Over here in my neck of the woods. So, anyway, I'll be posting more stuff on Instagram about the Star Wars Legion things that I paint. And when I get to a point where I get tired of looking at Stormtroopers, I maybe will work on something else real quick, and I'll post pictures of that as well. So follow me on Instagram if you're into that. It's just at Tabletop Minions. But yeah, it's an interesting game system, and I'm having fun with the models and that kind of stuff. But I'm also still... Actually, today I very well possibly will be playing some Kill Team with a friend of mine, I think, if he gets back from the family reunion in the time that he was hoping to. So, yeah, it's not that I've given up on anything else. I just like to, cover a lot of different bases. So, I hope that you guys all had a good time, and I hope that some of you got a good rest, and other ones had a good conversation. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. So we'll see you again in. I was just going to say we'll see you again in 2 weeks, but I don't know that we will. Now that I take a look at it, because like I just said, I might be at Gen Con. No, we will see you again in 2 weeks. The 28th. Yeah, 28th is good, and then it's the 31st, which is Wednesday. That's when I'm going, and then I'll be at Gen Con, and won't miss the... Oh, that'll be nice. That'll work out well. Yeah, so we won't... Our schedule will be good. Basically... oh, geez. I just messed up my calendar here. Yeah, so July... Today's the 14th. And so not next week, but the week after, the 28th, will be the next show. And then I will go to Gen Con. And then the week after that, the 11th, will be the next show. And I'll tell you about Gen Con. So it'll be great. All right, there we go. So maybe I'll have the camera thing figured out by then. We will see. But I want to thank everyone for coming and hanging out and having a show and asking questions and listening to me ramble on about stuff. And I'll hopefully again see you in 2 weeks. But I'll also have all kinds of other videos and social whatnot for you to check out. So I appreciate your attention and watching this stuff, and I hope that I'm able to give you some value and teach you some things and at least entertain a little bit. So see you again in 2 weeks, and thanks for watching.